My name is Louise Gourley. I'm 28 years old, and I've always been the odd one out in my family. The Gourleys are practically Boston royalty, old money, new empire, and an endless obsession with appearances. I grew up in our 5-story brownstone on Beacon Hill, surrounded by antiques and oil portraits of ancestors who had all dutifully followed the same path: prep school, Harvard Business, and then the family company. But from the beginning, I never fit. My father, James Gourley, built Gourley Development into a real estate powerhouse, turning heritage and ruthless calculation into hundreds of millions. My mother, Eleanor, guarded our family image like it was another priceless asset: flawless dinner parties, carefully managed connections, and no tolerance for public imperfection. My siblings fell neatly into the mold. Thomas, my older brother, was the golden heir. 6 feet tall, charming, ambitious. He did everything right, from sailing championships to Harvard Business School, and now he was set to marry into another dynasty, strengthening the empire. Amanda, my younger sister, was technically rebellious, but only in ways that looked charming in the society pages. She studied art history instead of finance, dated a family friend's son, traveled Europe in summers. Her small deviations made her look interesting, but never threatening. And then there was me. When I was 16, volunteering at a legal aid clinic opened my eyes to a different world. I saw people who had nothing but still deserved justice, and I knew instantly that was where I belonged. My parents never forgave me for it. They expected Gourley children to generate profits, not defend people who couldn't pay. Every holiday dinner turned into a battle, every achievement of mine reframed as a disappointment. Still, some part of me always hoped they might see me, might accept that my path had meaning. When I passed the bar last month, I thought naively that maybe this was the moment they'd finally be proud. But nothing in the Gourley household ever changed. The night of Thomas's engagement dinner, the house looked the same as it always had, but it felt colder. The brownstone loomed like a fortress as I climbed the granite steps. The crystal chandelier shone through the front windows, casting fractured light across the pavement. I paused at the door, touched my grandmother's pearl earrings for courage, and rang the bell. Inside, everything smelled of roses from Mother's garden, layered with the buttery scent of lobster bisque wafting from the kitchen. The Waterford crystal glimmered on the table, the silver polished, until I could see my own tense reflection in the forks. I was the last to arrive. Thomas stood by the fireplace, arm around Stephanie Lawrence, his fiancée tall and immaculate in a designer dress that looked effortless and cost more than a year's rent in Somerville. Stephanie smiled at me with a politeness so smooth it felt rehearsed. Louise Thomas has told me so much about you and your unique career choices. That single word unique hung between us like a veiled insult. Amanda sat slouched at the table, scrolling her phone with a bored expression that didn't quite hide her watchful eyes. She raised her brows at me in a silent warning. "Brace yourself." "Good of you to join us," Father said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. In his world, 5 minutes early was already 10 minutes too late. Mother greeted me with air kisses, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "You could have done something more with your hair," she whispered, before stepping back to admire Stephanie's sleek blonde waves. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake coming at all. Dinner began with rehearsed stories of Thomas's proposal on his yacht private chef violinist flown in from Vienna, a sunset over the Mediterranean. Everyone laughed at the right moments, the glow of pride in my parents' eyes so sharp it felt like a spotlight excluding me. I stayed quiet, nodding at the appropriate beats, hands clasped under the table to hide my trembling. When the main course arrived, seared duck with cherry reduction, I finally spoke. My heart pounded as I forced the words out. "I passed the bar exam," I said, voice steady, though my palms were damp. "I want to thank you both for supporting my education. I know it wasn't the path you would have chosen for me." Silence. Mother sipped her wine, eyes cool. Father cut his duck with slow precision, the sound of knife against porcelain louder than anything. Finally, he said, "Passing an exam is hardly worth mentioning. At the same dinner, we're celebrating your brother's engagement. But since you've brought it up, have you reconsidered my offer to join the legal department at Gourley Development?" I drew in a breath. "Actually, I've accepted a position with the Boston Legal Aid Foundation. It's the organization that inspired me years ago." The fork froze halfway to his mouth. "That little charity," he said, his voice low but venomous. "You want to throw away everything we've given you to play at helping criminals and welfare cases. They're citizens who deserve representation." I managed, though my chest was tight. It's real work. It matters. The room chilled instantly. Stephanie glanced down at her plate. Amanda bit her lip, eyes darting between us. Mother set down her glass with deliberate care. Louise, we've tolerated this phase long enough. We gave you every advantage. And this is how you repay us, by humiliating us. My voice rose before I could stop it. Humiliating you for choosing to help people instead of chasing profit. The silence after that was suffocating. Father's face darkened, his jaw clenched. When he finally spoke, it was like ice. Then perhaps you shouldn't be part of this family at all. My fork slipped from my hand. You are no longer welcome here, he continued, each word deliberate, slicing deeper than any knife. You are not part of this family anymore. Don't come back. I looked to Mother. She avoided my eyes. To Thomas, his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. Amanda for the first time looked shaken, but said nothing. Father, you can't mean... Wilson, father, interrupted, turning to the butler who had known me since childhood. Please escort Miss Gorley out. Her apartment keys are on the hall table. She'll find her financial access revoked effective immediately. The words landed like a gavel striking wood final irreversible. Wilson's eyes flickered with something like sorrow as he stepped forward. This way, Miss Louise, he murmured. And just like that, while laughter resumed behind me, I was erased from the Gorley family. The chandelier above the mahogany table glittered, casting fractured light across the polished crystal and sterling silver. To anyone else, it would have looked like the perfect setting for a celebration, an engagement dinner to merge two dynasties. But to me, every sparkle felt sharp, every reflection cutting me further out of the picture. The first course was served lobster bisque, fragrant and delicate. Father raised his glass to Thomas and Stephanie, his words rehearsed his pride, almost theatrical. To a union that strengthens our family's legacy, to a future built on trust, vision, and endurance. The toast was met with polite clinking of crystal. I lifted my glass too, though the champagne tasted bitter on my tongue. As the conversation turned toward the wedding, Stephanie leaned forward, her manicured hands resting lightly on Thomas's arm. We're thinking of holding the ceremony at the estate in Martha's Vineyard. It has history and, of course, the perfect view for photographs. Mother's eyes gleamed. Yes, Eleanor Lawrence was married there. It would be a beautiful echo. Every detail felt like another reminder. This was the path that mattered. Alliances, appearances, prestige. I stayed silent, focusing on the bisque. Amanda nudged my foot under the table, a quiet signal. I glanced up to see her eyes fixed on me with a look that said, "Don't speak. Not yet." But my heartbeat was already thundering. I had held back long enough. When the main course arrived, duck breast with cherry reduction, plated as though for a magazine, I set down my fork and drew in a breath. I passed the bar exam, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I wanted to thank you both for supporting me, even if the path wasn't the one you would have chosen. Silence fell like a curtain. Stephanie blinked, polite smile frozen. Amanda sat upright, suddenly alert. Father's knife hovered mid-cut. Mother's lips pursed her glass, poised but unmoving. It was Father who broke the silence first. Passing an exam, he said slowly, is hardly worth announcing at the same dinner where we are celebrating your brother's engagement. His tone was cool, measured, but the weight behind it pressed down like stone. I forced myself not to flinch. I've also accepted a position with the Boston Legal Aid Foundation. My chest tightened. It's the organization I volunteered with as a teenager. They help families who have nowhere else to turn. Stephanie looked down at her plate. Amanda's eyes flickered with alarm. Father set his utensils down with deliberate care. His voice dropped. The charity you intend to waste a Harvard law degree. They're not a charity. They're one of the most respected public interest organizations in the state. And it's the reason I chose law in the first place. Mother's wineglass touched the table with a sharp clink. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but far more dangerous. Louise, we have tolerated your rebellion long enough. We paid for the best schools, the finest mentors, and this is how you thank us, by working with criminals and welfare cases. Heat rushed to my face. They're people who deserve justice. Isn't that the point of law? You embarrass this family. Father snapped, his composure cracking. Do you have any idea what people will say when they ask what my daughter does? When Thomas is marrying into Lawrence International and you're what? Playing savior to the hopeless. His words sliced through me. My grip on the fork tightened until my knuckles ached. I never asked to be part of a family that values money more than people, I blurted, before I could stop myself. The air froze. Even the servers paused, mid-step, eyes darting nervously toward Father. His face darkened from red to purple. He rose slowly, napkin falling to the floor like a discarded token. When he spoke, his voice was ice. Then perhaps you shouldn't be part of this family at all. The world tilted. Mother's gaze was fixed on her wine. Thomas stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. Amanda looked at me, truly looked wide-eyed, stricken, but she said nothing. You can't mean I started my voice breaking. I mean exactly this. Father's words were deliberate, final. If you insist on this foolish path, you are no longer welcome here. You are not Gorley anymore. Behind me, conversation at the table resumed with eerie normalcy, as though I had already vanished. Mother whispered barely audible James, but she didn't contradict him. Stephanie shifted uncomfortably, her smile faltering, but she stayed silent too. The final blow came with Father's command. Wilson, he said, not looking at me, escort my former daughter out. Return her keys. She will find her financial access revoked immediately. Former daughter. The words lodged in my chest, suffocating. Wilson, faithful and gentle Wilson, who had bandaged my knees as a child and smuggled cookies to me after punishment, appeared in the doorway. His face betrayed something pity, sorrow, but his posture was stiff. This way, Miss Louise. I rose on trembling legs, feeling every eye in the room sear into me. Not one hand reached to stop me. Not one voice called after me. I followed Wilson out, the click of my heels echoing across the marble floor like the sound of my exile. The heavy front door closed behind me with a definitive click. A moment later, I heard the lock turn sharp, metallic, final. For the first time in my life, the Gorley brownstone was closed to me, not as a guest leaving for the night, but as an exile. I stood there, frozen on the granite steps, staring at the house that had been my childhood fortress and prison both. My key, now useless, burned in my palm. The laughter drifting faintly from the dining room window cut sharper than the cold evening air. Wilson pressed my coat into my hands along with a slim envelope. Your apartment keys, he said softly. His eyes glistened, though his voice remained formal. I am truly sorry, Miss Louise. I nodded, too numb for words. The taxi ride back to my Cambridge apartment was silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat. My reflection in the window looked ghostly blurred by city lights. Former daughter. The words replayed in my mind, each repetition heavier, more suffocating. Inside my apartment, the irony hit me at once. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a concierge downstairs, designer furniture, all of it chosen by my parents for my safety and their standards. And now all of it sat on shifting sand. I sank onto the couch in the dark, unable to cry, unable even to move. At 11:30, my phone buzzed. Amanda. I answered with a shaky breath. Louise. Her voice was hushed, nervous. She was clearly hiding somewhere in the house. Are you okay? What do you think I whispered, trying to keep my voice from cracking? It's insane, she blurted. I can't believe they actually did it. Father had Wilson change all the locks tonight, even the gate code. My throat tightened. Did you or Thomas say anything after I left? Silence. Then reluctantly, Thomas said, You brought it on yourself. Stephanie just looked uncomfortable. I tried to defend you, but Father threatened to cut me off too if I didn't stop. I closed my eyes. Of course. Thomas had always been the soldier. Amanda. Amanda was still tethered by dependence. Louise, her voice softened. There's more. Father called the financial advisor right after dinner. He's freezing all your accounts. Credit cards, savings, everything. The numbness shattered into panic. My rent is due next week, Amanda. I don't start the new job until next month. How am I supposed to survive? Her breath caught. I'll try to send you something from my account, but Father watches mine too. I can't do much. I'm sorry. When the call ended, I checked my accounts. Where there had been $5,000 that morning, there was now $0. My savings gone. My credit card declined when I tried to order food. My entire financial existence erased in hours. By morning, the storm had only grown worse. An email from my landlord. Your parents are no longer guarantors on your lease. Provide a new guarantor or vacate within 30 days. I sat at the kitchen counter, phone trembling in my hands as the reality sank in. In less than 24 hours, I had gone from secure to homeless. I called the Boston Legal Aid Foundation, begging to start work early. The office manager was sympathetic but firm. Our funding cycle doesn't begin until next month, Louise. I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do. By noon, I'd called half a dozen friends. 5 gave me sympathy. Only Jasmine, a classmate from law school, offered concrete help. Come crash on my couch, she said simply. I know what it's like. We'll figure it out together. I can't pay you right away, I admitted, humiliated. We all need help sometimes, she replied. Just pitch in for groceries when you can. That night, I packed a single suitcase. I stared at my furniture, the designer pieces my parents had chosen. I called moving companies, but every quote was out of reach. I started listing things online: sofa table, bed frame. By morning, strangers were walking through my apartment handing me envelopes of cash for items worth 10 times what they paid. And still it wasn't enough. 3 days later, I walked into a pawn shop for the first time in my life. My grandmother's pearl necklace lay in my hand, heavy with memories, her laughter, her warm hands, the only Gorley who had ever made me feel accepted. The shop owner examined it briefly. 800, he said. My breath caught. It's worth 10 times that. He shrugged. That's the best I can do. I'll give you a receipt. You can buy it back in 90 days. I hesitated, throat tight, then slid it across the counter. Walking out of the pawn shop with a thin envelope of cash, I felt as though I had sold not just jewelry, but the last tangible piece of family love I had known. The following week was a brutal education. I learned to buy store-brand groceries instead of imported ones. I discovered the public library's free Wi-Fi saving me from endless hours in overpriced coffee shops. I found out which bakeries left unsold bread in bags by the back door after closing. Humiliation and survival twined together. Every night, I lay awake on Jasmine's couch, staring at the ceiling. The ache of betrayal pulsed through me, but something else began to stir beneath it. A flicker of stubbornness, a spark of resilience. They had taken everything they could, but I was still standing, and I would not disappear. Jasmine's apartment in Somerville was a world away from Beacon Hill. The building's paint peeled at the corners, the stairs creaked, and the plumbing rattled every time someone flushed upstairs. But inside there was warmth. The mismatched furniture, the chipped mugs, the smell of garlic from the kitchen. It was chaotic, unpolished, but real. Her roommate Sarah barely blinked when I arrived with my suitcase. More the merrier, she said, sliding over a stack of textbooks to clear a corner of the couch. That night, as the three of us ate spaghetti from thrift store bowls, I realized it was the first dinner in years where I hadn't felt the need to perform. No careful posture, no rehearsed pleasantries, just messy laughter when the sauce splattered jokes about landlords talk about survival. I sat back listening and felt a pang of something strange envy. Is this what family could feel like? The days blurred together into lessons I'd never been taught. How to stretch $20 at the grocery store, how to sell secondhand clothes online, how to walk past boutiques I once shopped at without stopping. Humiliation clung to me at first. Harvard Law living out of a suitcase on a borrowed couch. But slowly shame gave way to perspective. Jasmine teased me the first time I insisted on buying imported coffee beans. Louise, that bag costs what we spend on groceries for 3 days. I looked at the price tag, then at her raised eyebrow. For the first time, I laughed at myself. I put the coffee back and picked up the store brand. Nights were the hardest. On the couch beneath a borrowed blanket, I replayed the dinner. The silence of my mother, the way Thomas didn't lift his head, the tremor in Amanda's voice when she called. I felt grief, but also anger, hot, steady grounding. They had cut me off, erased me, stripped me down. But underneath it all, I was still here. 2 weeks after my exile, I found a temporary job. Document review, mind-numbing, endless, scrolling through scanned contracts for a corporate firm. It wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it was money. Enough to hand Jasmine a few bills for groceries, enough to tuck away for bus fare. Each morning, I took the subway shoulder to shoulder with commuters, in worn jackets, briefcases, tired faces. For the first time, I was one of them. Not Louise Gorley, heiress. Just Louise, another young woman trying to make rent. The realization was terrifying, but strangely liberating. One evening after a particularly long day, Jasmine plopped down beside me on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. "You know what I like about you now," she said. I arched an eyebrow. "Now," she grinned. "You finally laugh at our bad jokes. Before it always felt like you were holding back, like you were visiting from another planet." Her words stung, but she wasn't wrong. My whole life I had been two people, the Louise my parents demanded, and the Louise hidden underneath. Maybe for the first time the second one was finally breathing. Then, one Thursday afternoon, everything changed again. I was sitting at Jasmine's tiny kitchen table laptop open, scrolling through job postings I knew I didn't want, but might have to take when a new email popped up. The sender, George Hamilton. The subject line urgent, please call immediately. My stomach lurched. George had been my father's attorney for as long as I could remember. I'd seen him in our dining room in his pressed suits, quietly advising father on mergers, contracts, deals. He had always seemed fair, almost kind, though distant. Why would he be contacting me now? I clicked the message. Dear Miss Gorley, a matter of extreme urgency has come to my attention regarding your financial situation. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss. This is time sensitive and impacts you directly. Regards, George Hamilton. I stared at the words until they blurred. Jasmine leaned over my shoulder. Sounds shady. Why would your father's lawyer reach out after everything they've done to you? I don't know, I whispered. My pulse was racing. But George, he isn't careless. If he's reaching out, something's wrong. Or something's hidden. Or it's a trap, Jasmine countered. Meet him in public if you do. Don't go anywhere private. I nodded, though my mind was already spinning. Could there be more they hadn't told me, more they had taken? I closed the laptop, heart pounding. The exile had already stripped me bare. I thought I had lost everything. But what if the Gorleys still held a secret over me? I chose a coffee shop near Boston Common, deliberately. Public, deliberately, neutral. I arrived 10 minutes early, picking a small table near the window where I could see both the entrance and the street outside. My heart hammered in my chest. Fingers wrapped around a cup of black coffee I could barely taste. When George Hamilton walked in, he looked older. Not just the usual lines of age, but worn as though the weight of secrets had aged him overnight. His suit was pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, but there was no mistaking the shadows beneath his eyes. Louise, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. His voice carried that lawyerly calm, but I caught the hesitation beneath it. Thank you for agreeing to meet. What is this about George? I asked directly. I can't imagine my father sent you. He looked down at his coffee, then back at me. No, this isn't at your father's request. In fact, he would be furious if he knew we were meeting. That alone made my pulse quicken. Then why contact me? He lowered his voice, leaning forward. Because there's something you need to know, something your parents have deliberately kept from you. It concerns your grandmother. A sharp ache filled my chest. Grandma rose. George nodded. Before she passed, she established trust funds for each of her grandchildren. Thomas received his at 25. Amanda's is scheduled for release next year when she turns 25. Yours, however, was structured differently. I frowned, trying to process. Father told me there was just an education fund. He said it was used up during college. George shook his head slowly. That isn't true. Your grandmother believed in you. She wrote specific terms into your trust. It would become accessible either when you turn 30 or upon completion of graduate school, whichever came first. My breath caught. I just passed the bar. Yes. George's expression softened, almost regretful. Which means your trust should have transferred to you immediately. I sat frozen. Transferred how much? He hesitated. Louise, you should prepare yourself. Tell me. 2 million. And it has grown since she first established it. The coffee shop spun around me. $2 million. My voice was a whisper. George nodded gravely. As of last quarter, approximately 2.3 million. I pressed my palms against the table, trying to steady myself. Anger rose like fire in my throat. And my parents never told me. He sighed. They have been managing it as trustees since your grandmother's death. But instead of preserving it, they've been borrowing against it for the family business. Using it as collateral. It's a direct violation of their fiduciary duty. The betrayal landed harder than the disownment. Not only had they erased me from their family, they had been exploiting what was rightfully mine. I leaned closer, voice trembling but sharp. Why are you telling me this now? You're their lawyer, not mine. George met my gaze, and for the first time I saw guilt in his eyes, because I can't ignore it anymore. As an officer of the court, I have a duty not to participate in something illegal. When your father instructed me to draw up new documents last week, removing you from family holdings entirely, I reviewed the financial structures. That's when I realized the extent of the misuse. I shook my head, fury and grief colliding. So what, he just planned to bury this forever? Pretend the trust didn't exist. Yes, and he thought he could intimidate me into compliance. But you need to understand, Louise. You have all the leverage here. If you retain counsel, you will win, without question. The thought should have comforted me. Instead, it felt crushing. My parents hadn't just abandoned me. They had stolen from me, and only now caught in their own trap were they vulnerable. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A new message from Mother. Louise, darling, we need to talk. Your father was upset and said things he didn't mean. Family is everything. Please come home. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. George saw the text and nodded grimly. They're panicking. They know the truth can't stay buried forever. They will try everything guilt manipulation promises to keep you from acting. I looked at him, my voice low but steady. They already took everything from me. What more could they possibly take? George folded his hands. Louise, they took your trust. Now it's up to you to decide if you'll take it back. That night, walking back through the common, I thought of my grandmother. Rose Gorley had been the only family member who ever truly saw me. I remembered her hands warm on mine, her voice gentle. You have a gift for truth, Louise. Never let anyone take it from you, not even family. She had known. She had left me this safety net because she understood what her son was capable of. And now, for the first time in my life, I held the power. But power wasn't the same as peace. What would I do with it? The next afternoon, the offices of Hamilton and Associates felt colder than I remembered. I'd walked these marble floors as a child, clutching my father's hand, told to sit quietly while real business was conducted. Back then, I thought George Hamilton's office was a cathedral of law. Today, I entered not as James Gorley's obedient daughter, but as Louise Gorley, attorney at law, armed with truth and, for the first time, leverage. Beside me walked Susan Park, a litigator my professor had recommended. She was sharp-eyed, composed, and utterly unafraid. When I told her about the trust, she had agreed to represent me without hesitation. We're not here to fight unless we must, she'd said as we prepared. But if they push, we'll push back harder. The receptionist did a double take as I gave my name, then led us into the conference room. My parents were already seated. Father immaculate in his bespoke suit, jaw tense, every detail of his posture screaming authority. Mother wore pearls, and her careful smile the same one she'd used to soothe reporters after family scandals. George sat at the head of the table folders neatly stacked, but his eyes flickered with unease. Louise' mother said, rising as if to embrace me, "Darling, how lovely to—" I stepped back. "This is Susan Park, my attorney." The flicker of surprise on their faces was almost worth the pain of everything that led here. Father's smile tightened. "There's no need for outside counsel. This is a family matter. You made it very clear last week," I said, evenly taking my seat, "that I was no longer family. So consider this a legal matter." Susan sat beside me, folding her hands, calmly on the table. "My client is entitled to full control of her trust. We're here to ensure that happens." George cleared his throat. "Yes. The trust established by Rose Gorley stipulated distribution upon completion of graduate education. That condition has been fulfilled. The assets currently valued at approximately $2.3 million must be transferred to Louise immediately." Father leaned forward, voice smooth but steely. "Before we discuss transfers, let's address what really matters: family unity. Louise, your mother and I regret the unpleasantness of last week. We're willing to put it behind us, to welcome you back." Mother reached across the table, her hand hovering, but I kept mine firmly in my lap. "You disowned me," I said quietly. "That isn't something you put behind you like a bad dinner party." Her smile faltered. Susan cut in voice professional. "With respect, Mr. Gorley, my client's trust is not conditional on reconciliation. We'll need complete documentation of all transactions involving the trust since its creation." Father's warmth snapped away, replaced by the hard edge I knew too well. "That won't be necessary. We have a proposal." George slid a document across the table, his hand reluctant. I scanned it, my stomach turning. It acknowledged my right to the trust, but restructured the assets, transferring control to Gorley Development. In return, I'd receive a modest annual distribution. Enough to live comfortably, but never independently. I pushed the paper back. "No." Father blinked, genuinely startled. "I don't think you understand what's being offered here." "I understand perfectly. You want my inheritance to prop up your empire, and you want me bound to you forever." His jaw clenched. "Ungrateful. Everything we've done, every sacrifice was for this family, and you throw it back at us." Anger rose in me, but I remembered Grandma Rose's voice. "Never let them take your truth." I steadied my breath. "What you did was illegal. You borrowed against funds that weren't yours. This isn't sacrifice, it's theft." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Mother leaned forward, her voice trembling with forced sweetness. "Darling, don't do this." Your father spoke in anger. "Of course you're part of this family. Let's not drag outsiders into our private affairs." Susan's tone sharpened. "Outsiders. Trustees mismanaging assets are subject to litigation. If this proceeds to probate court, not only will my client receive her trust in full, but your liability could extend further. We are prepared to act." Father's face darkened, his voice dropping low. Louise listened carefully. "If you pursue this adversarially, you'll never work in this city again. The legal community is small. Our name carries weight. One word from me, and that little legal aid position will disappear." A chill cut through me, but I forced myself not to flinch. "So you threaten me now?" "The same way you threatened Amanda when she tried to defend me." Their silence confirmed it. At that moment, the door opened. Thomas walked in, polished as ever, followed by Amanda. "Good father," said relief flickering across his face. "Now we can speak as a family." Thomas's voice was calm, reasonable, rehearsed. "Louise, you're overreacting. This doesn't need to become a scandal. Father's offering you stability. You should accept it." Amanda said nothing, but her eyes locked on mine, wide, conflicted, almost pleading. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. "I'm not the one who turned this into a scandal. You did. You told me I wasn't family. You cut me off. You stole from me. And now, caught in the act, you dangle forgiveness as if that erases everything." My voice didn't shake, not this time. Father rose too, towering, his anger barely contained. "Either you sign that agreement and return on our terms, or you walk away with nothing. Not just from us, but from every connection, every door in this city." For a moment, the room was silent, but for the hum of the air conditioner. I remembered sitting at this same table at 12 years old, clutching a story I'd written. My parents had dismissed it as frivolous. Grandma Rose had knelt beside me, eyes kind. "You have a gift for truth, Louise. Never let anyone take that from you, not even family." I turned back to my father, meeting his glare with calm I barely recognized as my own. I already walked away with nothing I said, and I survived. So here's my choice. I'll take what Grandma Rose left me. I'll take back what's mine, and I'll never again give you the power to cut me out. Susan gathered her folders, rising beside me. Father's voice followed, sharp and desperate. "You'll regret this. Without us, you're nothing." I paused at the door, looking back. "Actually," I said quietly, "without you, I finally get to be something." And I walked out, leaving the empire behind. The papers were signed within the week. George handled the transfer with quiet efficiency, and Susan oversaw every line to ensure there were no loopholes. When it was done, the account was mine, untouchable, independent. For days, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. After years of being cut off, after weeks of pawning my life away for cash, the idea of having millions at my fingertips felt surreal. But Susan's advice echoed, "Don't rush. Let the dust settle before you make big decisions." Still, there was one thing I couldn't wait for. I walked back into the pawn shop where my grandmother's necklace had been sitting in a glass case tagged with a cheap price. The owner raised his brows as I laid down the money without hesitation. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said, sliding it carefully into a velvet pouch. I clasped the pearls around my neck that night, alone in Jasmine's apartment, and whispered, "I got it back, Grandma. I got it all back." The first major step I took was leaving Jasmine's couch. I packed my single suitcase again, but this time I wasn't heading toward uncertainty. I bought a modest one-bedroom in Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood I'd never paid attention to, growing up full of families, students, and artists. The apartment was nothing like the Gorley brownstone. The walls were scuffed, the floors creaked, and the view was of a busy street rather than a private garden, but it was mine alone. I furnished it with second-hand pieces mismatched, but chosen by me. No decorators, no parental approval, no performance. The first night I slept there with the window cracked open to the sounds of laughter from the street below, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. When my position at Boston Legal Aid finally began, I threw myself into the work. Tenant evictions, domestic violence cases, benefits, appeals. Each client carried the weight of battles that mattered. It was exhausting, heartbreaking, but more fulfilling than anything I had known. And though my salary was modest, it was my salary. I made a deliberate choice to live on what I earned, preserving the trust for meaningful long-term use. For the first time, my worth wasn't measured in dividends or mergers. It was measured in the lives I touched. 2 months later, Amanda called. Her voice was tentative. "Can we meet, just the two of us?" We met at a small cafe near my apartment. Amanda arrived in designer clothes that screamed out of place against the chipped tables and chalkboard menu, but her eyes darted around with curiosity. "So this is where you live now?" she asked, glancing at the neighborhood through the window. "This is where I belong," I said simply. We sat in silence for a moment before she leaned in, voice hushed. "Father uses your empty seat at dinner as a warning. He reminds us constantly this is what happens when you defy him." But, she trailed off. But what I pressed. Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in her before, admiration. But I think he's scared. Without access to your trust, the business isn't as strong. He won't admit it, but I can see it. He knows he can't control you anymore. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. I didn't want to hurt the business. I just wanted to live my own life. Amanda's voice lowered further. Maybe I want that too, but I don't know if I'm as strong as you. You are, I said firmly. You just haven't had to prove it yet. She looked down at her cup silent, but I saw the cracks forming. The chains of dependence that had bound her were starting to weaken. Meanwhile, Thomas went the opposite direction. Word drifted back through mutual acquaintances. He was doubling down, working late into the night to keep Gorley Development afloat, aligning himself even closer with Father. When I saw him briefly at a legal event, he gave me a stiff nod and nothing more. The divide between us felt permanent. But I didn't need his approval anymore. By autumn, I had settled into my new rhythm. Days in the courtroom, evenings with new friends, weekends at community gardens and volunteer programs. For the first time in years, I felt part of something larger than the Gorley name. The city itself seemed different. Streets I'd once driven past in tinted cars now felt alive beneath my feet. Cafes, bookshops, neighborhood festivals. I was learning a Boston I'd never been allowed to know. And slowly the anger began to soften into something else resolve. I wasn't just surviving without them. I was thriving because I had broken free. One crisp October morning, as I prepared briefs for a housing case, my phone buzzed. A notification from the Boston Globe. The headline, Young Attorney Challenges Predatory Landlord in Landmark Case. My name was there, printed in black and white, tied not to the Gorley empire, but to my own work, my own fight. For the first time, I didn't feel like the black sheep anymore. I felt like myself. 6 months passed. Winter crept into Boston, dusting the sidewalks with frost. But in my Jamaica Plain apartment, warmth spread in unexpected ways. My secondhand furniture, the thrifted lamps, even the squeaky radiator, it all felt alive with my choices. No decorators, no staged perfection, just me. At Boston Legal Aid, I was no longer the new attorney. I'd won a significant case against a landlord who had been systematically evicting immigrant families, and the ripple effects touched hundreds of tenants. For the first time, my work wasn't just survival, it was impact. That week, the Boston Globe ran a feature on the case. The photo showed me standing outside the courthouse, papers in hand, a determined expression I hardly recognized as my own. The article called me a rising advocate for housing justice. When Amanda called the next day, her voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial. Father saw the article. He's furious. Mother pretends she's proud, but really she's terrified people will connect your name with ours. I laughed softly. They spent years trying to erase me. Now they can't ignore me. Amanda hesitated. Louise, you're doing what I wish I could, living without them. You could, I said gently. I'm not ready, she admitted, but the flicker of defiance in her tone told me the day would come. December brought an invitation I never expected, the annual Gorley Christmas Gala. A card embossed with gold, accompanied by a handwritten note from Mother. Family should be together for the holidays. I stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. Instead, I spent Christmas at Jasmine's parents' house. Their home was loud, chaotic children running through hallways, casseroles, steaming on the table, laughter echoing over board games. At one point, Jasmine's father raised his glass. To Louise, he said warmly, the newest member of our family. Tears pricked my eyes. For the first time, the word family didn't sting. It soothed. Spring arrived, and with it, an unexpected encounter. I was at the farmer's market, a tote bag, heavy with fresh bread and vegetables, when I nearly collided with two familiar figures. My parents. Mother's heels clicked on the cobblestones, her pearls glinting in the sunlight. Father looked older, his posture still proud, but his face lined, his eyes shadowed. Louise's mother said, startled, but quick to recover with her polished smile. What a surprise. I lifted my bag. I live here. There was a pause, awkward and heavy. A child ran past, bumping into Mother's purse, nearly knocking her off balance. Father steadied her, his hand trembling slightly. Are you all right? I asked, noticing the tremor. Minor heart issue, he muttered. Nothing serious. We stood there, strangers who shared blood. Finally, Mother gestured toward a cafe. Perhaps we could sit just for coffee. Inside the small cafe, surrounded by chipped mugs and local art, the three of us sat at a table that suddenly felt too small. The silence stretched until Father spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. You seem well. I am, I replied simply. My work is meaningful. My life is mine. He studied me, searching for weakness. A life completely separate from your family. A life separate from your control, I corrected. That's different. Mother set down her cup. We saw the article, the profile in Boston Magazine. They made you sound effective. The word effective was the closest thing to praise she could manage. I help people who need it, I said. That's all I ever wanted. Silence again. Then Mother's voice softened. Is there no way back to being a family again? I met her eyes. Not back, but maybe forward. If you can accept me as I am not who you wanted me to be. Father looked away, jaw tight, struggling with words he couldn't form. Mother reached for his arm, and to my surprise, he let her. I stood knowing I had reached my limit for this encounter. My door is open if you ever want to know me, not the disappointing daughter, not the failed heir. Me. As I turned to leave, Father's voice followed low and rough. Your grandmother would be proud. The words froze me mid-step. I turned, searching his face for mockery. There was none. Only tired resignation and maybe, just maybe, respect. I nodded once. Yes, I think she would. That night, walking home through my neighborhood, I thought of Rose Gorley. The pearls at my throat glimmered faintly in the streetlight. She had left me more than money. She had left me courage. The courage to walk away, to survive, to rebuild. Family, I realized, wasn't just blood. It was acceptance, chosen and earned. Sometimes it meant mending old ties. Sometimes it meant forging new ones. The Gorleys had cast me out, but in that exile I had found myself. And that was the truest inheritance of all.